Thank you so much, Ms. Bui, for taking the time to join me on the podcast. I've been looking forward to this discussion a lot. I know a lot of our students are interested in law school and in the same line of work that you do. So I thought, a good way to begin the discussion would be if you can kind of outline what your work is so our audience kind of understands. And also like what motivated you to end up where you are today.
So I work as a litigator in private practice. I work at a national law firm where I typically represent employers defending litigation that has been filed against them in various state and federal courts throughout California. As far as what brought me here, it wasn't really a lot of intention. It was a lot of just happenstance. I spent my undergrad years at UC Riverside without really a plan. And all I knew is I didn't want to be bored. And so I looked at some programs at school. I was a political science and Spanish major. And when I found out about the UC DC program, I ended up interning for what was then basically the DC City Attorney's Office. Handled some really interesting litigation as an intern and realized that this was an interesting profession that would probably keep me from getting bored.
Do you think, that's a really interesting way of putting it. Do you think a lot of students should take that similar approach where they don't know exactly where they're going to end up 5, 10 years from now? Or do you kind of think students nowadays should, especially because things, it seems like, continue to get more competitive, should have a more written out specific plan on their future careers?
I am a fan of understanding your strengths and your interests through a learning process rather than having this idea of what your life should look like. I know I think that's counterintuitive to a lot of high achieving academic types, right? Especially people that find themselves in the profession, in a profession like mine. But the reason why I say that is a lot of really demanding professions are not suitable for a lot of different people. And it doesn't mean you're smart. It doesn't mean you're not capable. It just means this isn't for you. And so, especially in terms of what I do, being a lawyer, being a litigator, being in court, having to stand up on my feet. I joke all the time that this job is essentially like doing homework for a living in some ways. And so if you hate doing like scout work, like writing essays, or doing a lot of reading and learning about new topics that like may confuse you, this is not the profession for you. There are other aspects of the profession that might suit your sensibilities, but this may not be it, right? And so while I think sort of a rough plan to figure out where you want your life to go is not a bad thing, sort of picking some, childhood fantasy about wanting to be something specific and then just sort of like being laser focused on that and not stopping to look at other options can sometimes be a mistake.
Do you think that's a common mistake that students will make? I remember some students, earlier, even before college, where they'll have a specific plan. I plan to attend this university and then get this degree and then do this and this and this. Is that a common mistake you think that happens where students kind of have that tunnel vision of I have to do this, my life has to happen in this particular order, and if something goes wrong, then it all goes to ruin. Do you feel like that's something that happens pretty often?
I think it is. I think taking a more sort of taking life as it comes at you, I think tends to build more resilience, which you kind of need in order to succeed in these really challenging professions anyway. What I saw a lot as I was coming through the ranks, so I went to all public schools, including UC Riverside, until I got to law school. And what I noticed, and by the way, I should just clarify, I went to law school at the University of Southern California. And so what I noticed was, people were very used to succeeding all of the time, right? And everything that they did. And then there was going to be some point where they approached some sort of challenge that was new to them, where they weren't going to succeed at the first instance, because that's just statistically impossible, right? At some point that's going to happen. And, I was used to, making mistakes and not doing things quite right and just being okay with that. Versus when I saw a lot of my law school classmates sort of, get that, that surprising grade they had never gotten for the first time. Like they didn't know how to react. They thought their life was over. And then it sort of reverberated for them as they sort of continue their way through the profession. Something interesting that does happen, specifically in the legal profession, is several years after law school, a lot of your classmates are no longer lawyers. I think that's not a bad thing. It's just people decided to finally let life sort of take them where it should.
Mm-hmm.
And so they realized, I got this great, education, I don't need to use it in this specific way. There are lots of other challenging, interesting things that I can do that are more suitable for my interests and my abilities.
That goes into the next question I was going to ask. What's a common mistake you see, particularly in students interested in going to law school? I'm interested in going to law school in the future too. What's something that you see that you wish you could tell them when you see it?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of the same theme I guess I've been harping on without realizing it the whole time. I think people think that there's a set path to this, and there really isn't. I think I mentioned I did major in poli sci, but that came later, and it wasn't because I wanted to go to law school. So I actually came into UC Riverside. I can't remember whether I was undeclared. I may have been. But my initial major was actually Spanish language. Did I know what I was going to do with that? I had no idea. I thought maybe I don't know, maybe I'll teach high school Spanish. Maybe I'll try to be a languages specialist with a government agency or something like that. It was just the class I enjoyed in high school, so I picked it, right? And these days where it comes in handy is when I travel to Spanish speaking areas and people have a giggle because I'm an Asian woman that is a fluent Spanish speaker. But it's one of those things where I think just having sort of this, like you said, the tunnel vision, I think can be a big mistake. And so there are many things I think that UCR is really wonderful for. One of that is it's a challenging but sort of casual learning environment. There's not a lot of pressure or competition. And I was someone, and I think a lot of students there are this way too, that sort of thrived under those conditions. And so you should really leverage those as best you can to sort of understand yourself, and to learn more about sort of where you think and how you think you will thrive as you make plans to sort of exit university and continue on through life.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really awesome to hear from someone who's actually in the field. What it is that we can be doing, what is we can be doing better, and what kind of mistakes we're making. And kind of shifting, I'd like to shift a little bit to the current work you're doing right now as a lawyer. Can you outline a really common challenge that you come across that you think people don't know about being a lawyer? What's something about being a lawyer, a problem or an issue or any kind of obstacle that you have to face that just the layman may not be aware of?
So my answer for that, I think, will be really unexpected. So it's going to be colored by the context that I work in, right? So I work in private practice. I think a lot of students, because I know UC Riverside especially, it's one of the most diverse campuses in the country, and also a lot of first-generation college students with lower income backgrounds. I was among those, that demographic. A lot of people sort of seek out legal careers for the financial stability, right? Not understanding sort of how money is made in legal profession. So if you are in private practice, where that is the sector of the profession that tends to pay the highest salaries, and the $200,000 plus starting salaries at large law firms that students will hear about. What people don't realize is there's at some point, if you survive in this system, it becomes a sales job. And a lot of people don't know that. Somebody has to pay you to do your legal work, right? And the people that have to pay you are clients, and the clients that can pay the fees that support those salaries are often Fortune 500 companies that you have to convince to pay you for your services. And so I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm really smart, I'm good at reading, I'm good at legal analysis, I'm going to study with my feet. They don't ask themselves, am I good at sales? How are my soft skills? Do people relate to me? Can I convince somebody that I'm fun to work with? These are not things that people think about.
That's really interesting, because that was actually going to be something that I was going to ask next. What kind of skills should students be trying to work on? And I think soft skills will often, seem to often get overlooked. People will try to have they'll check the boxes of the hard skills and say, well, I've got all these writing skills, reading skills, analysis, like you mentioned. But if they don't have the people skills, then, it doesn't go anywhere. Would you say that's related to the importance of building a strong network throughout your career as a student, and also afterwards, knowing the right person at the right time? Is that something that you really think about?
It is. So on the soft skills soft skills, I think, is a misnomer, especially being an employment lawyer. A lot of times the cases I deal with are often result from misalignment of what somebody thinks their job is versus what their employer actually values, right? A lot of times that relates sometimes to soft skills. Like for instance, someone that's a manager, you get promoted to management because you have the core functions of the job mastered. And now your job is now to manage people to help them perform the core functions of the job. And it becomes a people job, right? But sometimes people that perform the core functions of the job aren't so good at people. And so I tell people all the time, soft skills are real skills, and they should be overlooked as something that you need to develop and if you want to succeed in these roles. With respect to sort of the networking aspect of the job, I mentioned like this particular job, if you want to be in private practice, eventually becomes a sales job, right? The networking thing is real. Some good advice that was given to me when I was like a junior associate at the large law firm I started at was that like if you stay chained to your desk, like you are really limiting your opportunities. And so I made it a point to sort of, join various like groups of lawyers, we call them bar associations, go to conferences and just meet people that were my peers. I didn't try to, shake hands with like a CEO, not that like I met a few, but like I was just some kid to them, right? And then now that I've, now I'm about 15 years out, I'm in a position where a lot of people that I met when we were like junior lawyers, kept up the ranks, where we saw a lot of funny things together, they're sending me the work that fuels my practice. And that was just because I went out and made friends that were other lawyers and other people like in these business spaces back when I was junior, and we still had time for each other. Now, if you try to meet someone that's in a position that tries to send you work, they're gonna be like, okay, yeah, that was nice, I met somebody, but I don't know them, right? Versus, one of my friends, for instance, is she is the executive assistant to the general counsel for Nationwide Insurance. And so, I can call her or text her a joke about anything I want because we're actually friends, right? Instead of saying, hey, why don't you send me some legal cases? And it's a very different kind of relationship.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, one thing and this is kind of going to the next question I have is, networking is something that I didn't really experience until I got exposed to it at UC Riverside. I really didn't find, I was one of those who tried to check as many of the hard skills, I want to be good at this, reading and writing. And I didn't realize how important people skills are. Kind of somewhat similar to that. One thing that I like asking those in the legal field is, what kinds of differences do you think exist from when you were kind of on your journey from a UC Riverside student to where you ended up versus students like me right now? Like, do you think there are some differences based on developments, like things like the prevalence of social media, changes in government and politics? Are there any maybe any other social or cultural shifts that have occurred in that time? Are there any stark differences that you notice, or is it more similar than most people might think?
I started out the profession at a very interesting time. I started right before the 2008 global economic recession, and now there's that weird stuff happening with Silicon Valley Bank this morning, but we'll see what happens there. But I think the biggest change that I've seen in the 15 or so years I've been practicing is the velocity of everything, right? Everything just moves 1,000 times faster because we're also connected. When I started, email was still kind of new. It wasn't actually new, but it was new to lawyers. Now there's the prevalence of, messaging platforms, other internal project management tools, other things that are web-based, virtual meetings. I've found that especially with sort of the prevalence of remote and hybrid work, not that I don't think those things are valuable. In fact, I've been largely remote for half my career. I found that that can be a challenge for especially more junior lawyers to develop, what we talked about, those really valuable soft skills when you're just mostly in your own space, communicating with people by video. It just requires a lot more intention. And that's easy for me to have that intention on a looking back basis. But I could imagine it's quite difficult to even understand what that intention should be. If you're very junior and trying to figure out your way around, you don't even know who you should be trying to schedule meetings with, who you should be calling, how often you should be calling them. I sometimes forget because I don't feel like I'm as old as I am. And I don't feel like I'm someone positioned the way I am, that I forget that sometimes it'll freak some of the younger lawyers out to ask me if they can have 15 minutes of my time. And that's just bizarre to me. But I have to remember sometimes I guess that I have that effect on people nowadays.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way COVID, especially these last few years, has shifted people's mindsets and how they approach things. And is there anything else since COVID begun that really like shook your profession and your career, maybe your firm, that you wanted to maybe note?
I think again the speed at which things move, and sort of the I think that has changed a lot. Also, I mentioned that I'm a litigator, so that means I appear in court pretty often. It used to be some, and this goes to the velocity thing in a sense. It used to be a court appearance used to eat up your whole day, right? You'd have to go to court, get like I'd have to, if I left from Orange County to go to court in LA, I'd have to leave at like 6 a.m., right? To get there, to make sure I got there in time for an 8:30 hearing. I'd have to sit through this morning calendar. I probably wouldn't be gone until noon, and I'd get back to my desk around like, maybe like 2. Now it's I dial into the virtual court gallery, and I might spend an hour online maybe if my case isn't called first, and then I'm right back to doing what I'm doing. And so I think that change in sort of workflow sort of requires you to jump from things to things a lot faster. And while you're not going places and it's not exhausting in that sense, the sort of the mental pivot can be a little more exhausting because you don't get that downtime.
Yeah, and actually what I was going to ask next was what kind of consequences specifically regarding the velocity and speed of things happening, what like main consequences, negative consequences do you think have occurred or might occur in the future as more young attorneys kind of they're cultivated under this environment where things are moving really, really quickly all the time?
I think it can be really hard to draw boundaries. I found that I was actually better at placing boundaries on my work, probably before remote work became prevalent. Now it's really odd. I feel like sometimes like, oh, can I really step away from my workstation for like an hour just to go eat? Like, do I really have the time for that? And I do. It's just I think I have to get over a mental hurdle because I'm used to sort of being available all the time, whether it's to my clients and even to the people that I help support in doing their work in terms of the junior associates that report up to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's fascinating to see how as things move forward, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, how not just in the legal field, really in all professions, how things will change and accommodate and adapt to the fact that like you said, we're all connected, and that causes things to move so much faster. I always think that's a really fascinating topic. Kind of shifting gears, I wanted to talk a little bit about the work that you do specifically. What's a common challenge that you face specifically in your line of work? That that you think that people should be aware of maybe before pursuing the legal field? Because I also know, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, there are some people who simply choose to be lawyers or doctors because of the income, but they may not be the best suited for the job.
I think one of the major challenges that I see, I mean, I've learned to adapt to it, and I can explain how, is that I think people don't realize the level of like, it's just you. Like in the end, if you're doing this right, it's you making, strategic calls and making really important decisions and how to proceed in terms of like the grand strategy for a case that, could be worth like, recently, for instance, there was a case, I think it was against Tesla, where there was like $130 million verdict against the company. Like, you make 5 missteps and maybe your client gets hit with something crazy, right? And so in the end, like this is all going to fall to you. And while, there are some ways to get some ideas about what to do next, it's up to you to figure out like, what do I need to do? What facts do I need to develop? Like, who do I need to place on these teams? It's actually it can be a lot to manage, and I think for people who are not used to one like sort of like quick decision making, and 2 just like exercising judgment, it can be a really challenging profession.
Definitely. I think it's really interesting to hear that from you. And one thing that I've noticed as well, like working on or working with other students who are interested in law school, is it kind of goes back to the theme of the conversation we've been having. Is they're in it, they're interested in the income or other kinds of benefits like that, but they forget that there's so much more. And I wanted to kind of hit on that point you mentioned, the fact that it's kind of just you. Is that like a challenge that you sometimes like when you reflect upon yourself, like when you reflect on the past, is that something you kind of taken, you realize, like, does it kind of like hit you sometimes, the fact that at the end of the day it is, you are kind of on your own? Is that, and kind of beyond that question, nowadays a lot of people are connected and, teamwork and communication are super valued. Do you maybe think that given the changes, socially, with Gen Z now, entering the workforce, do you think that independence factor where you kind of are self-reliant, is that something that you think might shift based on like social changes, with social media's prevalence? What are your thoughts on that kind of skill?
So, I mean, not ever, like, I think, especially when it comes to, I think, how you make strategic decisions on just any major business or sort of legal decision, right? You can only do so much crowdsourcing. Like it's like a too many cooks in the kitchen problem, right? In the end, somebody has to make an executive call on how to take a direction on something after understanding what the right inputs are, and then getting the information to actually like appraise those inputs, right? And so while I think there might be more information or people to consult, in the end, you have to if you get to where you want to get, you have to make that decision, and you have to be okay with what that decision ends up being, no matter what the consequence is, because you can't control the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always really interesting to talk about that. Like I think in the idea of working independently versus making those decisions, I can definitely relate to that. Like there have been times where I've felt that I need to make the decision here, but I'm too scared to make it, or I kind of want to kind of throw it on someone else and have them make it. So in a lot of ways, I think it is also like another soft skill at that decisiveness. Ms. Bui, to kind of end the episode, I was wondering, if there's one message you could kind of give to students who are interested in going to law school, or really interested in pursuing a profession in the future, a professional career like that. What's the one piece of advice you would give, and what's kind of one reassurance if you could give them? What would it be?
The piece of advice is make it fun. Like a lifetime of work is a long time. And if you're just in for the money and you're not having fun, you're going to burn out so fast, especially for a profession as demanding as a legal profession, especially in private practice. As far as reassurances go, I am a really proud alum of UC Riverside. I had such a wonderful time there. It was really transformative in terms of how it helped me understand, like sort of what I was interested in, what I was good at. And it's a really safe, like sort of productive learning environment where, like I mentioned earlier, it's low pressure, low levels of competition among your students. Everyone's really supportive. And so, just rest assured, even if you were sort of unsure about your decision to go to the school, that if you're still there and taking advantage of the resources it offers, you're in the right place.
Awesome. I love to hear it. And I especially like your advice, to keep things fun and be wary of burnout. Ms. Bui, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to share this episode.
Thank you.